who are we? eCampus Ontario. eCampus Ontario is a nonprofit organization funded by the Ontario government that serves as a hub for online and tech-enabled education in the province. We support digital transformation across all publicly funded institutions, including colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes. Our role involves leading research, developing best practices, and supporting innovation and collaboration among member institutions, ultimately enhancing education in the province. We lead in research, development, and sharing of exemplary practices in online and other forms of technology-enabled learning. We support the development and delivery of quality online learning experiences across the province. We support member institutions in fostering innovation, collaboration, and excellence on behalf of Ontario students and faculty. And we continue to contribute to the evolution of teaching and learning by responding to emerging technologies and the developments of state-of-the-art digital transformation. More specifically, in 2021, eCampus Ontario launched a research and foresight unit, of which I'm very proud to be part of. And we did this to support the post-secondary education sector in navigating digital transformation amidst a highly uncertain and rapidly changing context. What we do can be briefly explained as we explore data and information about what is changing, emerging trends and opportunities, and future possibilities to support the identification of spaces for impact and change, digital transformation, and strategic action that prepare the sector for digital by design educational futures. How do we do that? Some of the more standard and traditional research practices that you're familiar with, we support with project scoping, literature reviews, environmental scans, instrument creation like surveys, focus groups guides, interview guides. We used a mixed methods research approach, gathering both quantitative and qualitative insights that help us have a full picture understanding of the topics of interest. How do we determine the topics that we research? We use both an internal and external approach, topics that are impacting and are important to post-secondary education, online and technology-enabled learning, and the sector at large. We also do ongoing scanning of signals of change, trends that can open different possibilities for the future of education in Ontario. And we also conduct organizational evaluation of the virtual learning strategy, understanding the impact of eCampus Ontario's programs, products, and stakeholder engagement. One of our main areas of work over the last 3 years has been the virtual learning strategy. In late 2020, the Ministry of Colleges and Universities and eCampus Ontario launched the virtual learning strategy with 3 rounds of funding to drive growth and advancement in virtual learning across the province's post-secondary institutions. Its goals were to prepare the sector for a future of hybrid learning, accelerate the transition from emergency remote teaching and learning to high quality online learning, and to position Ontario as a global learner and innovator in virtual learning. Many of the projects that were funded through the VLS are available as OER on the eCampus Ontario Open Library. And it was within this context of the virtual learning strategy that we were tasked with understanding the journey of international learners in Ontario and to identify potential digital supports for success. So I will pass it on to Graham now to talk to you about that research project.
Thank you very much, Rocio, for covering the history and what led to this project, as well as for being here with me today. When this project was conceived, it was spring of 2023, which was last year, and we can conceptualize the research that we were going to be doing. Of course, the international learner space, as of right now, is a very dynamic and ever-changing space. So please note that everything we say is indexed to when this project was undertaken. Come August 2023 through October 2023, we conducted our research, which included the use of a survey and follow-up interviews with international learners. In November 2023, the federal government put through some changes, which included requiring post-secondary institutions to provide a list of accepted learners to the federal government itself. In December 2023, there were the changes to the study permit application, which included an increase in the required amount of cash on hand or in a bank account for an international student to obtain a permit to better reflect the increased cost of living nowadays, along with letters of accreditation to be verified by the province. And then in January 2024, less than 2 months ago, changes to the postgraduate work permit were made and the international learner cap was announced, which includes a 350,000 student international learner maximum nationwide and split by province, which is only 35% of the current number of international learners accepted on a yearly basis. Next slide, Rocio. Now we will move into the results and the research that we actually conducted. When we put out our survey conducted online, we reached 250 international learners, of whom we conducted further in-depth interviews with 11. Of the colleges and universities in Ontario, noting, of course, that our research was confined to Ontario, 14 colleges and 11 universities are represented, and 33 different countries where in the world were represented in our survey sample as well. You can see the nations that international learners were from illustrated in the graphic on the slide. However, regardless of the different nationalities or experiences, two distinct groups emerged from those that participated in our research. Those who were experienced students and those who are direct entry students, that is, attending post-secondary for the first time when they arrive in Ontario. Next slide, please, Rocio. Thank you. What we learned from the survey sample, that we learned that there is a significant information barrier for international students. They find government and institutional websites may be confusing and turn to informal channels that may be uninformed to find answers. The graph on the right illustrates where learners accessed information when applying to study in Ontario, excluding web sources. As you can see, international learners often turn to agents or family friends who have lived experience. In interviews in particular, learners revealed that they turn to, beyond just those sources, immigration influencers who may be found on social media platforms such as TikTok and YouTube. When it comes to web sources, which of course are not illustrated in our graph, the Government of Canada, Government of Ontario, and websites for the specific post-secondary institutions were the most popular. Again, noting international learners noted that these spaces are difficult to navigate and may sometimes also contradict one another. As for challenges that international learners noted that they face throughout their journey in all stages, the main ones noted once arriving in Ontario were finances, housing, employment, and immigration as the top concerns. The graph on the right highlights the survey question asking learners what areas they struggle to find information about once they arrive in Ontario. As we can see from interview participant quotations, also illustrated on the slide, international learners struggled living with unknown people, not knowing what the reality is on the ground. They revealed through interviews that they feel as if they are sold false promises and false stories of what Ontario may be like, as opposed to what is found perhaps on the websites or in particular through experiences with their immigration agents saying different things than how it actually is. Struggles abound. Next slide, please, Rocio. Thank you. From the survey sample, we further learned that international students, of course, noting that this is the survey sample, do not understand Canadian culture and customs as much, seeing as they are coming from, well, non-Canadian nations. These areas include legal and financial responsibilities, such as paying taxes, uh, sexual harassment, what constitutes that, how to report it, their rights as a tenant and as a worker, uh, just living the day-to-day life, as well as formal and informal education, especially emphasizing the value of co-curriculars, both as a place for personal development and as a place to meet other people. We further learned from international learners they do not feel prepared specifically for learning in Ontario. Things that are different from what they may have experienced in at home include style of teaching, um, a shift to the use of online and hybrid modalities in Ontario, expectations from them as a learner, as a student, and in the classroom, communications such as how to message and communicate with their peers, with their instructors, um, where to find academic support, a further follow-up from their communication struggles, as well as digital fluency in general, which would align with not feeling prepared for the online and hybrid modalities. Next slide, please. Thank you. We also learned that international students feel lonely and disconnected from both domestic and other international students. Interview participants indicated that while they may be from the same country as other international students, they all speak different languages. And whether they're from a large country, they may even feel isolated from other students from their own country due to that language barrier, aside from the shared English or French, depending on the institution in Ontario. Another interview participant indicated that they basically only know other international students because there isn't as many chances to meet domestic students as they're so busy between doing their classes, working, and participating in a peer mentorship program. We will now move on to some of the potential digital solutions. In the interviews, we described several concepts to learners to alleviate some of the pressures and challenges that they identified in our survey. Other digital solutions that we did not describe to learners were presented to us by the learners during the um, in-depth interviews. Uh, these learners wanted digital solutions to the problems they face and found that there could be things that were helpful. The scope of barriers on the left in the image on the slide is taken from design thinking. These are solvable barriers, which are barriers that we understand and know how to solve, such as information barriers and academic processes. The difficult scope, which are barriers that we understand, but for which solutions are elusive, which include loneliness and adapting to Canadian culture and customs. And then there are those that are wicked problems, which are barriers that are complex to define and even harder to address, which include housing and employment and immigration. If you've been paying attention to the news in this space lately, I'm sure you can see how a lot of these come up. In particular, you can see some of the proposed digital solutions on the right, located with each of the different scope of barriers that they would address, along with a potential timeline. Just because something appears on the slide does not mean that eCampus Ontario or the government of Ontario or any other levels of government are committing to them. They are potential solutions, not solutions that will be implemented. They are merely things that were discussed with learners and that learners indicated may help them along their journey. Worth noting, of course, and the reason we are here today, is that one of the proposed solutions to help international learners become accustomed to education in Ontario and assist them with their barriers and meet their challenges is the uptake of open educational resources, which is in the top right of the solvable section. Next slide, please, Rocio. Thank you. One learner in particular noted how expensive it is to come to Canada, and being asked to buy textbooks, which cost a lot of money for only a few subjects, can be very difficult because it is hard for international students, especially in the first couple of months when they don't have a job, to be able to afford the cost of expensive textbooks. as indicated, spending $300 may be a lot for them. Thank you. As such, the use of open educational resources can support international learners. The Open Library at eCampusOntario houses many OER that can be used by instructors to alleviate those financial concerns, including the one that Michael Dick will be talking about later today. Further support and outreach efforts, therefore, are required to ensure that faculty choose OER for their learners. One in particular that I'd also just like to mention is that at eCampus Ontario, there is also a common cartridge file called the Digital Fluency Accelerator that can be used and adapted, developed earlier this year by one of the members of the research team on this very project, to support learners to enhance their digital fluency skills. At this point, I would like to turn the floor over to Michael Dick to talk about core skills for actionable professional communication.
Well, thanks very much, Graham and Rocio, for having me, and to eCampus Ontario for hosting this event and for asking me to speak today. I just want to share a little anecdote first. I have been teaching for many years, as you heard at the top of the presentation, at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson University. My teaching there these days is focused on our international college, which is a pathway program where we bring in international students. We provide 4 hours of instruction per course per week instead of 3 to help with learner support with transition matters, with study skills support, and also to provide some additional instruction in the discipline to, help them provide, I think it's been described to me as a soft space to land, and then we bring them into the second year of their conventional undergrad program at TMU if they're successful. So that's where a lot of my focus has been today today. That's where a lot of my focus is these days as well. I'm teaching at Conestoga College right now. And of course, like all of the colleges, there's been a large influx of international students, and we're currently in a period of transition as Graham mentioned. But all this to say, I teach predominantly international students these days, perhaps like many of you. And like many of you, if you're working in some sort of a learner or student services support type of role, you've probably noted that many of the challenges that Graham and Rocio were speaking to are quite manifest, are quite substantial, and they span everything from academic skills support matters to personal support to legal and settlement and housing support and all of those things. I had a student just yesterday at my class who was thanking me for an extension on a particular assignment and for acting as a resource person for him. He was being completely taken advantage of by his landlord, as has unfortunately been the case with many international students here in Ontario and elsewhere, being asked to demanded to pay his rent 12 months in advance, and all kinds of damage deposits, which, as you probably know, are illegal in Ontario. Now, I mean, I'm not here as an academic, and frankly, even our student services staff are not really here to provide legal advice or to help fix that problem. But obviously, we are important as resource people, as frontline educators, to then refer to student services, and they can refer to a variety of other other resources. My point being that the teacher is right there on the front line. And the more access we have to resources, both in terms of people and in terms of OERs, as we're talking about today, the more we have for our students in terms of providing high quality, reliable information. They're coming to us, right? I mean, they're coming to us because they see us right there. We're teaching them every day, right? We're a friendly face, hopefully. And they're coming, hopefully, to our student services staff, and we're helping to refer and all of that, right? But the point is, they're coming to us when they want sort of that real picture, reliable knowledge. It's us. It's not just the government websites. It's not just the immigration agents and their friends. They're coming to us. So we need support, and we need resources to help provide that support. And OERs, I think, can very much be a path forward. So we'll just go to the next slide if we could, please. And I'll just briefly introduce what I had been working on over the past few years. So now we're talking more about our soft skills and about our academic critical academic skills, not housing per se, but again, we're in the same domain here of providing support to students. These were not developed primarily or with, these were not purpose-built for international students. This came out of the first round of the VLS, the Virtual Learning Strategy. I received a grant and was able to lead a project where we developed a series of 5 OERs as modules. At the time, SCORM files. I've now done an update, so they're in XAPI, Experience API format, to make it a little easier to integrate it into your course shells and various learning management systems. Oops, excuse me, spam call. But these particular modules are focused on different skills in professional communication. They align with many of the areas that, as you just heard from Graham, international learners are they align with many of the areas where international learners have indicated they would like assistance. So for example, we have many learners who are of course seeking employment as they're permitted to do and as they frankly need to do in many cases. There are, of course, careers for services and other support resources available to them. But if you can start with a module where you teach students how to write a cover letter or prepare for a job interview within a Canadian context, so much the better. Students need support with things like report writing and presentation skills. All students, it's not just international learners. So if we can provide this to them in all of their courses, not just a course that's specifically designed to teach professional communication skills, we're doing a great service to our students. Now, these modules were, as I said, funded in the first round of the VLS strategy. So we published the first edition in 2022. It's in the library, and you see a link there, and maybe we can also share that in the chat or at the end of the presentation for those who want to start working with them and explore them and who'd like to start exploring them. I just created a version 1.5, some revisions, which I've left with the open library. I don't believe they've been indexed yet, but hopefully they will be soon. These are zip files that contain mostly SCORM data, so you can probably bring them into your learning management system. However, as I said, that's now a legacy format, and once the new edition is there, I think you'll find it a lot easier to work with. We have deliberately put them in this format for LMS integration. One of the challenges, as I'll show you in a second, is we developed them in Articulate 360, and in particular in Articulate Rise, which is a great tool, and it allows for rapid authoring, and it's nice and slick, and it works across mobile beautifully, and we still put it under the appropriate license. We did all of our copyright checking. Everything's fine. It's just that when you're using commercial software like that, if you want to make a new edition, I now have to go in and do that. If someone else wants to work with it, they need the source files and they need the software to go in and work with that. So this was a good learning experience. And at the time, or I guess since then, many of the open tools that were purpose built for developing things like OERs, like Pressbooks and H5P. These are tools you may have been hearing about in other workshops, or you can learn more about on the eCampus Ontario website. When it comes time for version 2.0, I can assure you it's going to be redeveloped from scratch, from the ground up in those platforms, so that it's I think better in keeping with the spirit of OER development, and also frankly just easier for anyone to modify as they wish. However, keeping it in this format has allowed for a level of quality assurance, and it's allowed me to hear from people who've adopted the resources. It also went through a peer review process recently, and I received a lot of feedback, which, as I said, I then used to create a version 1.5. So let's open up the resources in action, and I'll just open up my screen here and share. This is a D2L shell where I'm hosting these. This is here at TMU, but at Conestoga, I have them in in another D2L shell. At the TMU International College, which uses Moodle, I have them in a Moodle shell, so they will work. And this particular module that I developed is focused on rhetoric and persuasion. And the way that these work, obviously, as OERs, is they're designed as an interactive textbook. So we have the usual array of content and activities. So one of the things that you can do in SCORM format, and certainly now in XAPI and other formats, you can do quite nicely is you can, for example, set up a quiz so that it's graded and it will transfer that into your grade book in the learning management system. So this wasn't set up specifically for that. Actually, I can blow this up a bit. This wasn't set up specifically for that because these aren't, we're not using them as graded quizzes. I was using these specifically for completion purposes, but that is something you can do. One of the things that's really nice about OERs, of course, is that you are free to integrate all kinds of materials. And as long as you are doing all your copyright checking and you're using licensing appropriately, you are able to integrate materials from all over the place and draw on a wide variety of resources that you can then pass on to others who wish to make revisions to OERs and develop new editions in ways that you simply can't do with a commercial textbook where you're always going through the core authors by providing feedback. In this particular module, we talk about how persuasion works in professional communication, and I give a lot of examples from media and how it works in, let's say, advertising or in politics and society. So in creating OERs, whether that's in H5P or here in Articulate, it's, we've come a long way in the sense that we don't have to just put links to videos. We can actually integrate them. We can integrate a variety of activities. And again, these can now be done quite nicely in the H5P tool that eCampus supports if you want to use things like flip cards for activities. If you want to, as I said, do quizzes and mix and match and checking, you can certainly do that quite nicely. I'll just show you what one of the mix and match activities looks like around logical fallacies. So the accordions. Students tend to like the interactivity. I mean, we know this, that if you are, as I am, working with, let's say, 4 hours a week, 4 hours a week in a professional communication course, I can't lecture for 4 hours. Even lecturing for 3 is not really advisable these days pedagogically. We certainly found in the pandemic that little chunks of blocks of work are important. And the way that we design these modules, there are 5 modules. You can split that into maybe a 1 or 2 week window where students could save their progress and then complete work along the way. And then that can be spread out in little chunks over a full 12-week term, right? And then you can put that in alongside your other activities, your other traditional course contents. So you could use this in a synchronous course, as I often do, or a hybrid course as part of the hybrid component. Maybe they spend an hour a week or every 2 weeks working through a module. You could, of course, integrate this into a fully asynchronous course as part of a full 3 or even 4 hours of programming each week. You could record a lecture maybe to go along with that. There would be traditional assignments. So in a professional communication context, that's how I would be using, and that's how I use a course like this. And I found it helpful even in teaching professional communication courses that are not about business or technical communication. I've even found teaching courses, let's say, in visual communication or communication theory, things that we only briefly touch on. These are designed for a first or a second year overview course, but they're there for students who want additional material or who might benefit from additional material if they are struggling with something. So if you, as I do, try and practice this idea of teaching to the middle, right? It's my 50-person class. I'm going to assume that, we have essentially a baseline here, and some are going to benefit from more resources and some will benefit from some enrichment. You can make good use of OERs, including these, to provide that. Now let's take this outside of the ProCom professional communication context, and we'll just go back to, actually, you know what, just before we do that, let me do a new screen share. I just want to show you what I'm using at Conestoga. I didn't develop these, and I don't know a lot about their development specifically. They did come out of the VLS1 grant, and this is also a series of modules. These were developed specifically as a full, I guess, 13-week course in the college system, and these were D2L shells that were created. This entire course that I'm teaching is about student success. So this is a course specifically designed for student success for higher learning, and the modules focus on everything from academic integrity to how to seek out technical support to student success. And use and student non-academic conduct. It's customized for the Conestoga context, but these modules also cover a wide variety of common material on life in the Ontario context, academics in colleges, APA format, all those things that may be new to an international learner or frankly to a domestic learner. It's designed to give students a good base for their future college studies. And I could see how these modules could be integrated in a wide variety of other courses, even if you don't have the benefit of having a specific course for professional communication. We often teach those as service courses. And actually, the colleges, if you teach in a college, you know all about that because you probably have one or more communication courses that are required. So my modules, I'll put that in quotes, my modules are very useful there. And some of these that I'm using here at Conestoga that were developed as a course as part of the VLS1 grant, I could see these as being very useful across the board in many other courses. So with that in mind, let's go back to the slides. And I want to just give you a few thoughts on how we might further make use of OERs given the context and given the research that Graham and Rocio have spoken about today. We know that there's a huge gap here, a major gap here in terms of the international learner and their experience both in Ontario, but also in Ontario higher education. And I would probably say that's the case across Canada. It's not just Ontario. So, as I've just mentioned, we have a variety of resources here that can be used to supplement instruction in communication, in my case, or in the case of the Conestoga course, academic success type courses. But wraparound supports, right? So we often talk about, or we often struggle with providing more material for students that's of high quality, that is academic in nature in the sense that it's gone through some kind of a review process. It's not just a random website or something that their friend told them over lunch one day, but at the same time, it's not just what the institution is telling them, because for many people, there's an agenda, right? I mean, they want them there. That's important. And even if it's government, we often take for granted, no matter who's in charge, provincially or federally, we are a democracy and we do have and take great pride in a nonpartisan professional public service. But if you're coming from a part of the world where that's not the case, we may take for granted the trust that we place in looking at the Tribunals Ontario site, understanding our rights as renters in Ontario. I might look at that and say, yes, that's indeed an authoritative source. But my student, right, probably would have appreciated some kind of an OER or a resource that maybe, if it's not me in my course, maybe it's the international college and they have a series of modules. They already do, but they could certainly use more that we then put into an academic success type of wraparound support shell in Moodle that provides not just links to the material, but appropriate commentary that will help direct them, right? So they're not always having to go as a first stop to student services. So I would really suggest to you that OERs are in an excellent position, or we're in an excellent position to use OERs to support our students because of how rapidly we can develop them, but also because of programs like the ones eCampus runs and funding programs that they administer, because of the strong focus on quality. So these grants or these grants have been substantial in the sense that, it does cost money. These aren't free to develop. We do want to hire editors, as I did, for example. We want to go through peer review to ensure high quality. But you notice once we get it out there, look how much use and value we, as educators, as taxpayers, quite frankly, look at how much we can get out of that. And if done properly, look how easy it can be to update these as things change, as we continue to go through peer review. But unlike, let's say, Wikipedia or a blog that students are maintaining. We know we have some authority behind this, and we also know that it's a recommended resource. It's one that we can say with some degree of certainty we would gladly recommend to our students as a way to educate them on life and studies here in Ontario, to hopefully equip them for success and at least to point them in the right direction where they might benefit from additional support. So I really think that as OERs, as the uptake improves, I was just at an event as part of Open Education Week at TMU on Monday, also generously supported by eCampus Ontario. Thank you. And it was a lovely group of OER Rangers, of which I'm one, advocates, librarians, including some focused on OERs and copyright, ed tech, technologists, and others at the university who champion OERs. And it really was great to see how much more uptake there is and how a lot of the challenges that we found in terms of getting faculty to integrate them, getting folks to trust them, getting chairs and deans to recognize them as part of, let's say, a tenure and promotion process. Plenty of challenges remain, but they are easing. And I think that as we're seeing in the eCampus research, and just more generally, there's a major knowledge and resource gap here in terms of helping students prepare for life and post-secondary studies in Ontario. And we're now in I think, a good position to help close that gap using high quality resources. And since we have agencies like eCampus Ontario, consortia like eCampus Ontario, grant programs like the VLS, and a broader strategy for how we can use OERs and resources to help our international students, I think we're in a good position to help close that gap and address some of the myriad challenges and issues that we're currently facing in Ontario higher education. So thank you, and I look forward to questions and comments at the end.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing with us the exemplary work that you're doing to steward the use of OER as supports for international learners. A few closing notes before we go into question. I have shared the link to Michael's OER through our open library in the chat. I will also be sharing with you now the link where you can find the publications that we do from eCampus Ontario. If I can find the tab for the chat, here we go. So there is where you will find the forthcoming publication of this International Learners Research Project that Graham shared with you. You can also find other reports related to digital credentials, impacts of the virtual learning strategy, foresight reports to understand the signals of change and patterns of change that are opening up different possibilities for the futures of post-secondary education. And we are always happy to hear about any other questions that you might have. You can contact us at research@ecampusontario.ca. But we are happy to, we have a few minutes. We're happy to take your questions now.
I saw one in the Q&A there. A RISE course exported to D2L. I could comment on that briefly. I gather that's in reference to the core skills project. So it's a course that was created in RISE 360 and then exported into in version 1 SCORM format. And that's what you can download now if you're in the eCampus library. There's zip files that contain the SCORM data, and you could upload those into any LMS. My understanding is that most places are starting to phase that out in terms of if you went to your IT department and said, hey, I need help with this SCORM file, they're probably going to groan at you. And that's exactly why there's a version 1.5. This is actually a good reminder. I should follow up with the Open Library just to check where we're at with that. But that format, if you do want to hang tight, feel free to send me an email. I'll put it in the chat if you want to know maybe when the next edition is out, if that's a little easier for you to use, feel free. So what happens when you use those commercial platforms is that you have options in terms of how you export it, what you do with the source files, etc. I guess my overall point was that going forward, especially since the open source tools have gotten so much better over the years, it really is remarkable. I mean, just actually doing a textbook in Pressbooks or creating interactive objects in H5P that you could then either use as a standalone thing, or you could integrate those into an LMS shell or into a Pressbooks book. I mean, that's improved so much now that the quality, I mean, it's not as slick as a commercial platform, but that's kind of part of the point, right? It's about functionality and about ease of editing and integration over something necessarily being slick and corporate looking. Will it push to the LMS? It can push, you can configure it to push a completion grade, yes. Good question about time to completion. No, it doesn't. And that's, I wonder if that's Graham or Rocio, I wonder if that's been a question that's also come up with other OERs, that people are wanting to download and integrate them, but they don't necessarily have a sense of how much time, they want to suggest students spend on them, I guess, unless they go through it themselves.
We also have one of our colleagues from the Open Library here in the call, Siri. Maybe you can help us answer that question and give some further insight. Sorry for putting you in the spot. If you're there.
I would just say, while we're checking on that, I mean, the way that I had designed these, or my team and I had designed these, we were looking, or we were benchmarking this with a 12-week, this is the communication one, benchmarking it with a 12-week course that was using a textbook that basically had, I don't know, something like 10 chapters. And what we basically did was we developed the 5 plus a bit. We developed 5 modules with the expectation they would spend roughly half an hour a week and complete one module over a 2-week cycle. So about an hour or so every week or two. And I would probably suggest to anyone, if you have a hybrid course, or if you take the 3-hour block that you have, as most of you and most of us do have, in most circumstances, and you want to hybridize something, it's often an hour, I find, right? You maybe have a 2-hour lecture and a 1-hour something else. Look at the OERs as maybe helping you support that hour, especially since students can complete these asynchronously. That would be a useful way to combine asynchronous and synchronous teaching. That would be my suggestion.
Perfect. And Siri is now with us in the chat, helping answer Sandra's question about time to completion.
I don't know any that, I haven't seen any OERs that specifically indicate that. It's good. It's a good question. It's a very good question.
Definitely a good note to take for just continuous improvement of OER updates that the Open Library is always working on. So good question.
Well, Siri is investigating that for Sandra. I see another question in the Q&A asking, is there a difference in perception with students that live in dorms on campus as compared to the ones that lived in rented apartments, etc.? Well, we didn't explicitly ask that in the survey, so we're only going off of the 11 interviews there. The housing requirements is a large piece for international learners, where they indicate that housing is not as much of a concern when they're living on campus, as opposed to finding a place to rent, having to afford to struggling to afford to meet the amount of rent that they pay, etc. Of course, international students who both live on and off campus still find similar challenges with their experiences with regards to the educational and learning aspects, their Canadian cultural aspects, and the finding part-time work. I hope you found that answer helpful. And Siri has put a response to the expected time to complete for OER in the chat for anyone looking for that. Thank you, Siri.
And I would guess, I haven't tried this, but depending on which LMS you're using, I mean, a lot of them can collect pretty significant statistics, right, in terms of how long you're working with a learning object. So if you integrate, depending on how you integrate these, you might be able to collect those sorts of stats from the LMS if that's important to gauge.
Perfect. And yeah, you can always, in your adaptation of it, you can always be flexible in creating depending on your goals, right? Like you might be adopting the full module or only parts of it, depending on what you're looking for. So.
Well, one of the pieces of feedback we received in the peer review, and it wasn't something that was really addressable in the communication modules project, was just the idea of how well do these work standalone versus as a complete package. And there was some, dispute over that or some debate over that, and that's quite reasonable. I mean, we designed them such that there is a sequence to them, right? However, if you jumped in at number 3, you'd be okay. I don't think you'd get as much out of it though, in terms of how we framed them. So that's a really, really important question. And it's one that I would imagine if you're writing an open textbook, anytime you're dealing with some sort of complete set, whether it's a whole course or a series of modules or a sort of like a textbook, right? How much of this can stand on its own versus the whole thing? And I mean, that's no different than assigning a commercial textbook, right? Can I give them one chapter or something more than that? So that problem or that consideration is still there. I don't feel as guilty assigning one chapter though out of an OER. It's actually a point I've brought up a few times in discussions, right? I mean, it's one thing to tell the students you do need to buy a textbook. We're going to use it every single day. It will provide all kinds of support for you, etc. The reality is, I mean, we often assign half the book maybe sometimes, or even if it's the full book. Often students don't feel the need to read all of it or to do all the activities. So if you have OERs, whether it's modules or texts, I mean, you don't have to feel bad if it's just, I want you to read one chapter. Okay, right? It's a good chapter. That's fine. So I also find there's something nice just about, feeling like you really are supporting students, I think, in some of their educational pursuits by easing the burden.
Thank you so much, Michael. I also see Siri has shared with us in the chat the Open Libraries email in case any of you have any more questions about the Open Library in general and how to work with OERs. You can send an email at open@ecampusontario.ca. We have a few additional minutes, so if there's any other questions that you have about this presentation, we'll be happy to take them. We'll hang around for a little bit longer. And if not, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Graham and Michael, for presenting the very important work that you're doing. And I hope you keep enjoying the rest of Open Education Week. We have one more question. Will the recording and PowerPoint presentation be shared? Recording, I will defer to our communications team to help us answer that when that would be available. And presentation, yes, we will be happy to share the slide deck afterwards to everyone registered in this presentation.